What up, Gromies? Alright, check it out. Hey, yo, what up? The name is NerdGrows. I got the buttery turf flows, the way I make these herbs grow. This one's for all my tent homies and my earth hoes.
Yo.
What
are you doing, man?
What?
Start the podcast.
Alright.
What up, y'all? Episode 28 of the NerdGrows podcast. I'm sorry I took last week off. So, as I said on the last episode, like my allergies were really bad. And it ended up just turning into full-blown bronchitis, and I lost my voice for over a week, on and off. At least, I couldn't talk long enough to do a whole podcast and then be fine the rest of the day. I don't know which one of y'all told me gardening would be a good hobby, but you're the worst. I'm allergic to everything. I'm like the kid in Adam's Family, where he's like, if my mom uses a dryer sheet, I die. But yeah, it's been a pretty crazy few weeks. I don't really have the lifestyle where I can rest a whole lot. And I also like knowing that it's allergies. I just keep pushing myself, which probably isn't the best thing, but I got shit to do. My garden beds are looking really well, like my vegetable garden. I have 3 beds going right now, and each raised bed has 2 different vegetables in it. And then I have tires, like old tires that I have pumpkins and watermelons growing in. And then I have like a big pollinator area that's all wildflowers, sunflowers, and I actually stuck a couple more pumpkins in there just to see what happens. It might be too crowded for them though. So yeah, everything's been going good. Just been doing yard work. Oh my God, I didn't post any pictures, but I took down this beast of a bush on my property. Not even on my property, it's the woods behind my house. All of those trees, those seeds are like so invasive. So like if I don't do anything to my house, I will have trees growing like every 6 inches in my foundation of my house, around my entire house. Since I've been sick, I've been kind of lazy on the finer details of things. So I went on the side of my house the other day to cut a little bit of the hedges, and the whole side of the house was a tree growing out of the foundation every 6 inches. And I had just pulled everything and, put down weed killer and plant killer and everything a couple weeks ago. And it's still coming out like this. It's just a never ending battle of you have to kill it as soon as you see the seedling, or else you're just going to end it. Like it's going to ruin the whole foundation of the house eventually. But anyways, all of that to say, I had this giant bush in the front yard, and it's big, like it's taller than me. When it's trimmed, it's still taller than me. It's probably like 8 feet wide, and I've been neglecting it for the past couple years, especially when my son was like a baby and I didn't really have a whole lot of time outside of the house. So these trees have been growing for the past 2 years inside of this bush. So the bush was like 6 feet tall of the bush, and then another 2 feet of the trees that had came out through the top. So it looked like it had like it looked like the bush was the face, and then the trees growing out the top were the hair. It was pretty crazy looking. So I actually trimmed the whole bush all the way around, and then I went underneath. I kind of like tapered the bottom up so it looks round. And then I went underneath I have those like bolt cutter size pruners, and I cut all the trees out, and then I literally pulled the trees from the bottom, and I sat there. It was like playing tug of war. I had to be like hand over hand pulling it and like leaning all my weight into it. And I finally got them all out, and it looks good now, but it took like 6 hours. I was like, yo, let me prune this bush real quick. And then I come in 6 hours later. My wife's like, you wasted the whole day. No, she didn't care. But I felt bad that I wasted the whole day. That's me projecting my guilt over that. But yeah, it was a pretty wild experience. I'm at the point now where I actually took an afternoon. Basically every week I would pick an afternoon, and I would pick one of the bigger pieces of vegetation on my property and then fully prune it and shape it. So I'm at the point where everything kind of looks good. Like I said before, I always kept my lawn mowed, and I always kept the main hedges cut, but I'm trying to get more into the finer details this summer. With that said, I have been doing a lot of like reusing, recycling, upcycling kind of things with all of the vegetation. So I'm trying to do my best to not just put lawn and leaf bags on the side of the road to be picked up. I'd rather use as much of the vegetation as I can. So when I cut all of those trees out of the big bush, I took all of the leaves off. I filled a 5-gallon bucket and then I, put water and shit in it. I also foraged all the mushrooms on my property and put it in. And I had that sealed with a airlock on it. And hopefully in a few months that'll turn into some Jadam liquid fertilizer. So that'll be cool. I've never made it before. I'm not sure if I said it on the last episode, but my mom got me that Rebel Gardener book from the library. She takes my son to the library every week, and I asked her if she could find me any KNF or Jadam books, and that's what the librarian came back with. But that book was pretty cool. I'd never heard of the guy before. I can't even tell you his name now, even though I read the whole book. But that book's kind of like how to natural farm in an urban environment. So making the most out of space, using every part of everything, not buying stuff from the store. So it shows you a lot of the like KNF basics, like how to make IMO, how to make lab. So I kind of used that book as a way to get myself organized. And then now I've been like slowly trying to implement everything. So on that note, I made a 3-tiered worm bin. I bought really big totes. I don't remember how many gallons they are, but it's the ones. Actually, if you saw the video that we put out yesterday of Grateful resetting his grow room, if you haven't, go check it out on YouTube. Especially if you're a fan of Grateful's grow room like I am, you actually get to see like the inner workings of it, which is really cool. But he was using those big tough boxes, with the yellow grid tops. I have the exact same ones, but a smaller model. So the basic setup is the bottom one holds the worm juice, worm piss, what's going on. So with that, you install a bunghole. Is that proper use of that word? You drill a hole in the side and then you put a tap on it, like the same way like you would get ice out of a cooler, like just like a little drainage tap on it. And then you take 2 more of those bins and you stack them inside, but you kind of like Swiss cheese the bottom with holes, and then you also make some air holes around the edge of the top. So I got that all made. I don't have any worms yet. Hopefully we'll be getting some soon. But another thing I've been doing is getting the worm bedding ready. Since I've been spring cleaning and renovating the house, my garage is just filled with piles of like different recyclables, things I can upcycle, trash, etc. So I've been taking all the cardboard and peeling off the outside layers of it and just using the like corrugated part in the middle. So I'm assuming that's going to have no like finish coating on it like the outside would. So I've been tearing that into strips. And then also any smaller branches that I've been cutting out, much like the large bush we were just discussing, I've been shredding those into wood chips. And I just have like a big bin of raw cardboard and wood chips that I've been making. So I can use that for the bedding. And then I'll figure out how to acquire some worms and what other layers I need to get the bin going. I also bought a roll of hardware cloth and I want to use that and some of the scrap wood to try to make a IMO box, but I'm not that far yet. But this is like my rabbit hole I've been going down the past couple weeks. And then the bigger branches that I cut out of the bush, I stripped the bark off and I'm letting them dry out, and I'll probably use them as plant stakes in the garden once some of the plants get a little bit bigger. But yeah, it's been a pretty crazy adventure so far. This is my first summer ever gardening, other than like maybe growing something as a science project when I was little, but this is my first year trying to have a garden, and I'm just trying to go super deep into it. One of the things that's really motivating me to do KNF and Jadam gardening, or at least using their techniques, is the cost effectiveness. I watched a lot of videos on YouTube where it's like, all right, if you add up all the materials for your garden, it's like $300, and then you end up growing, $17 worth of produce, essentially, I don't know if it's that crazy, but I've seen a lot of videos where like the ratio of what it takes to make the garden versus the retail price of what you get off of it is pretty bad. But a lot of that is due to buying soil, buying mulch, buying plant food, all the different things you would go to like Lowe's or Home Depot to get. So natural farming techniques where you're only using bacteria that you're culturing from your own property and then repurposing all of your prunings and yard scraps and everything. I like that you don't have to buy anything. And then I also kind of like the idea, which is kind of the philosophy behind the whole thing, is like maintaining the natural ecosystem of your immediate surroundings, as opposed to going to the store and it's like, oh yeah, this soil's from California and the perlite in it is from Eastern Asia. But yeah, it's all going well so far. It's really just about finding the time to get all the systems in place. But I'm hoping, or at least my goal for this summer, is to learn how to do a lot of these natural gardening techniques and then be able to have them all set up for next summer where I don't have to buy anything, or at least buy the bare minimum, to the point where having the garden is cost effective. And when I say that, I don't just mean like budgetary purposes, like helping the finances of my family, but if you're talking about organic farming or natural farming, right? It's like, oh, you don't want to buy produce at the store because of the pesticides and everything, and it wasn't grown in your local area, but then you're going to turn around and buy all the ingredients. You know what I mean? You're like, oh, I won't eat that because there's pesticides on it. And then you go to Home Depot and buy your own pesticides, put it on it. Or like, oh, it wasn't grown organically. But then you go out. I mean, I'm probably preaching to the choir here because I know most of us are organic gardeners. And along the same lines, if you're talking about gardening for sustainability and kind of like a get off the grid kind of thing, what does it matter if you're on the teat of the grocery store or the teat of the hardware store? Being able to do everything yourself and close the loop on your own property, I think, is a lot of our goals. So not only am I just gardening to get fresh produce for me and my family, but I'm also trying to create a sustainable loop. And honestly, that's like, since this is my first year gardening and I have to, just like with cannabis, I have to learn all the plants, how each plant works, what they need. I'm probably not going to do that great this year. So really my main driving focus is setting up the natural farming process. But holy crap, I just realized I've been rambling for so long and we didn't even start the show yet. All of that was really going to be my topic for this week, and I kind of just blurted it out right at the beginning of the show. So back to housekeeping. You know that feeling like when you go over to your friend's house and then, his mom kind of treats you like you're one of the kids? That's kind of how I feel this week, because the great Nama Potter made me and Grateful a whole batch of ashtrays. Well, actually, she made you guys a whole batch of ashtrays. But they're really cool. They're all different, crazy different colors. It has our Grateful Nerd YouTube logo imprinted in the middle of it. And we're going to raffle one off next week, and then we're going to sell the rest of them on Etsy. So if you don't follow us on Instagram, make sure you follow us. That's at NerdGrows and at _Grateful_Gardener_. Make sure you're following us because we're going to put out a reel with all the details and everything in the next week or so. And we're really excited. They came out so good. And all right, on to my grow. We have Mango Smile on day 77. She's just the old ass lady at this point. She's already done putting on buds and everything. She hasn't moved. And I'm just at the point, I'm just letting the trichomes mature. Been checking the trichomes every few days, making sure she has water. Not really doing anything crazy, just waiting for harvest at this point. She looks great. She has this like orangey, coppery senescence going on, which looks awesome. I'm guessing that's part of why they call it Mango Smile, because of the orange senescence. But we have Ice Latte on day 71. Also, along the same lines, it's done, just waiting for the trichomes. That plant was definitely very stunted, so I'm hoping it'll finish very soon. At least I've noticed that I've never had a plant go like the full 84 days. Not that 84 is like a hard cutoff, but I've heard people going like into the 90s, and I've never had that happen. I always harvest like late 60s to mid 70s. So the fact that these two are still going is crazy to me. And also, much like the name, the iced latte does have like a brown senescence, just like I don't think it's like deficiency. Like I've seen pictures of the plant before, and it definitely has like brown senescence going. It looks cool. It looks like coffee. Now the plant doesn't actually smell like coffee, but it does have that kind of like earthy vibe to it. So I get it. I'm not sure, what it'll be like after it dries and cures and all that, but we'll know in a couple weeks. Wizard Stash Remix on day 48. It's huge. It's very, very tall. It's the second tallest plant I've ever grown. More on that in a couple minutes. It's starting to stack buds on. Like, it's not just at the pom-pom stage. It's actually starting to get nugs on it. And yeah, it looks beautiful. I fed it, keeping it watered. That thing will just drink as much as I give it. I did let it do like a little dry back this week, mostly because I was super busy. It's not like I neglected the plants. I knew I was going to be busy, and I kind of aligned the watering gap with my busy period kind of thing. But yeah, it's doing really good. And then finally, we have Permanent Holiday on day 45. And this thing is like, I'm pretty sure it's done growing now, but it got pretty close to the light. Not to the point where I think it's getting damaged by it, but it's a good 6 inches taller than the Wizard Stash Remix. And that one doesn't really have, it has all the bud sites and the pom-poms, but nothing of substance yet. But it's looking beautiful. Yeah, I'm really excited. It seems like I'm starting to get the feel of watering down. I also feel like I say that about every 5 to 10 episodes, but it's because I do legitimately, like, I've leveled up again, Especially because the Permanent Holiday is the biggest plant I've ever grown, and it's in a 5-gallon pot, and everything else is in earth boxes. And then the 5-gallon pot, I was able to get that big, so that's pretty good. But yeah, that's how my indoor grow is going. Now, like I said before, today's topic was going to be how I am teaching myself natural gardening techniques for the vegetable garden, but I already kind of ranted about that. But I will just very quickly sum it all up. So right now I'm trying to make Jadam liquid fertilizer, which is where you take plants and water and ferment them for a couple months in a bucket. Now, a lot of people prefer to use the same plant that they're going to use the fertilizer on. So for example, if you're growing corn, you would fill the bucket with corn, and you use use parts of your previous harvest in order to make food for your next harvest kind of thing. Now, since this is my first year gardening, I don't have any previous harvest to turn in the fertilizer. So I did some research on different JLF recipes, and someone said that when it's springtime, your grass has a lot of nutrients in it because it's trying to grow, and it's like coming back to life after the winter. So I actually had to do some weed whacking around the fence because I had these blades of grass getting really tall. I wasn't about to try to ferment stuff that shot out of my lawnmower, but I did a little bit of weed whacking of grass that was growing up along my fence, and then I filled up the bucket with that. I also foraged all my lawn mushrooms, and then I put all that in. And then I also had to do some light pruning on a couple things, so I took leaves from that and put it in. And then I filled it up with water, put the lid on it. The lid I actually have is for making beer, so it has the hole in the top, and I just put an airlock on it to seal it. I haven't seen the airlock bubbling at all, but I know it takes a couple of months, especially since, I don't know, I didn't see anything that said you were supposed to add sugar or anything like that. It just said plant matter and water. So I'm assuming it's going to take time for the cellulose to break down to the point where the bacteria starts eating it. Or I'm just going to have a bucket of disgusting water in a couple months. It's a learning process, right? Don't take anything I'm saying right now as what you should do. I'm just telling you what I'm doing. Like I said, we set up the worm bin. I made bedding for it. I need worms. And then the next thing I need to learn is I read about it and I've watched a couple videos on it, but I haven't really settled on what I'm going to do is how to layer it. Because I've seen people, you put the bedding in and then you have kind of a 7-layer dip of compost. You have the sour cream layer, the tortilla chips, No, but I've seen people like put some dirt on top of the bedding and then start compost on top. I've seen people just put raw food scraps in the top. I've seen other people put like pre-broken down compost in the top. So I wasn't sure if I should like I have a tumbler composter. So should I continue to fill up the tumbler composter and the worm bin composter like separately? Like if I have food scraps, like take half and put in one and half put in the other? Or do I put everything in the tumbling composter and then when it gets full, I dump it into the worm bin, close it, and then keep filling up the tumbling composter? That way what's going in the worm bin is like a mixture of solid food and broken down food. I don't know, but that's something I plan on learning about this week. My next goal after that is to make a IMO bin. Now, IMO is, what does it stand for? Indigenous microorganisms. And it's where you collect bacteria that's naturally occurring on your own property. And this is typically achieved by soaking rice. And then, as you can see on our YouTube video, Grateful put out an awesome video about how to make lab. So you can take the water from the soaked rice and make lab with it. But then you actually take the rice itself and you put it in like a mesh box with a cover. Well, not a cover, but you have to put some sort of tarp over it to keep like rain and a lot of the moisture out. But you leave it in the woods for a couple days until the rice gets covered in different bacteria that's around your property. And then at that point, there's a bunch of different things you can do with it. I've seen people mix it with brown sugar to kind of, and let it ferment to kind of make it almost looks like a honey or molasses, but it is filled with all different bacteria. And then you can take a spoonful of that and mix it into your watering can. Or I've seen people make liquid fertilizer out of IMO, but the actual IMO rice is kind of like the base material you need that unlocks all these different recipes for you. So I'm working my way towards that. I haven't built the box yet, but I bought the hardware cloth and I have like some scrap wood and some like small wooden boxes and different things. I'm going to try to fashion something together that works. And then I actually figured I can, my pollinator patch in my backyard is right next to the woods. So I figured if I put it right at the edge of the pollinator patch, it'll get everything from my pollinator garden and it'll pull stuff from the woods as well. So I think that would be cool. But yeah, just doing science. It's great science experiments for the young ones. Little activity you can do together. It was so funny. So my son's been we put a bowl of water outside for the dogs and it was just like a regular mixing bowl. So my son sees the mixing bowl and he's like, "Oh, we can make cakes outside now because that's the bowl you mix cake batter in." So he dumps it out. Now the dogs don't have water, but he brings it into his he has like one of those plastic like Fisher Price forts. He brings it in there, he fills it up with mud, and he's making me mud pie cakes. So then him and I are making the worm bin together, and I'm drilling all the holes into the bin, and every hole is spitting out this little tiny black ribbon of plastic. So at the end of it, he sees all these little black plastic bits on the floor, and he's just like, "Oh my God." And he scoops a whole handful up and he runs into his fort and he's like, "All right, now we have chocolate cake with sprinkles in it." So now I have this, I go outside and every day I'm getting a mud and plastic mud pie. No, it's fun. We've been having a blast. So that brings me into another thing. I know I told you I've been trying to cut back on beers and cut back on cigars, and I have been. I'm not completely sober or tobacco free, but I've been doing pretty well. And I actually weighed myself for the first time since New Year's, I believe, was the last time I weighed myself, and I'm down 21 pounds. So even though I'm not at the point where I want to be yet, I know I'm making progress, which is great. I've been kind of every week been trying to do a little bit less. So like this week, so I usually would have 2 black and milds or like 1.5 black and milds and then 2 tall boys, right? That's usually what I would do on a typical night. And now I'm down to Sunday. I had 1 tall boy and 1 black and mild. Sunday's special though, because I have to put out the trash cans. So I'm spending a lot of time in the garage, like breaking down cardboard and crushing recyclables and just trying to make the most out of the little room I have in the trash cans. And then Monday, I didn't do anything. And then Tuesday, I had most of a tall boy. I ended up pouring a bunch of it out and half of a cigar. And then Wednesday, I had the other half of the cigar and a tall boy. It's still a lot, but it's like way, way less than it was. And then obviously with me being sick, like last week, I barely did anything. I think that's part of why I was going hard this week. I was like making up for lost time. But yeah, with me being sick, one of my favorite things to do when I'm sick is binge watch horror movies. So that's actually what I spent a lot of last week doing. And that brings us into our pop culture section of today's episode. I'm going to tell you about the movies I watched and why I did or didn't like them. I'm a pretty easy person to please, though. I like most movies, even movies that people say suck. As many of you know, I'm a huge defender of Dude, Where's My Car? All right, so as per usual, I'm not going to give you any spoilers outside of basic plot synopsis details. So if you haven't seen any of these movies, don't worry. The whole point of this is I'm trying to recommend them to you. Or maybe I'm not trying to recommend them to you. So the first two movies I watched was the original Strangers and Strangers Pray at Night. As some of you probably know, they're rebooting that whole series. And they already recorded all three parts of the trilogy. And one is already out right now. And then part 2 and part 3 are coming later. And I haven't seen the new one. This week I watched the original 2. Now, I had seen The Strangers once before. I actually think I saw it in theaters when it came out. But I haven't seen the second one. So that was my first time watching it this week. Now, if you're not familiar with The Strangers, it's a slasher horror slash... I said slash twice. Nah. It's a slasher horror that's also a home invasion horror, which I know like those two subgenres usually go hand in hand. And there's 3 killers. There's a dude that wears a burlap sack mask over his head, and then there's a girl that wears a like pinup doll mask, and then there's one that wears a baby doll mask. And the kind of I wouldn't say theme, but the kind of point they're going for is that they don't give you a whole lot of background on the killers. And home invasion is usually like personal, so it kind of has that weird feeling of like it feels personal, but it kind of isn't at the same time, if that makes sense. It's hard without spoiling anything, obviously. And the first one is pretty cool, like the style of it is good. The second one I didn't think was as good. However, they did do a couple cool things. Like, for example, the second movie takes place in a trailer park. And you think, like, with home invasion horror movies, they're usually single setting, right? If you think of the first Purge movie, where they're just in the house, and then the series expands from there, kind of thing. So having it set in a trailer park is cool because the characters can be inside the trailer being attacked, and then that gives you the home invasion tension, but then they also have the freedom to run from trailer to trailer or to the main office or anything like that. So I thought that was a cool twist. The other thing that really stuck out to me was towards the end of the movie, there's some scenes that use some wider shots that I thought were cool, because usually, in slashers or home invasion, everything's like very up close because it wants you to feel like trapped and claustrophobic kind of. So like them playing around with wider shots in like the second half of the movie, I thought was really cool. Now, these aren't the best horror movies in the world, so if you're like just like a general horror lover, I wouldn't really recommend them. But if you are a fan of the slasher genre or the home invasion genre, they're definitely worth a watch because they do a few cool things with those genres. All right, so the next movie I watched was Late Night with the Devil, which is a newer movie, and a lot of people seem to be really liking it. I liked it a lot myself. This movie combines elements of analog horror and found footage horror. And it's basically, you're just watching a whole broadcast of a like Johnny Carson style late night talk show. But it's Halloween night, and he has a bunch of psychic mediums on. And then he also has a skeptic on, and the skeptic is 100% based on James Randi from real life. And it does have that whole, like, remember James Randi used to go on talk shows and just embarrass these psychics by pointing out how they're frauds. So while the broadcast is going on, obviously, like with any ghost or psychic based horror movie, weird stuff starts happening and you don't know who's doing it. And then the mystery unravels from there. But it's really cool. I love analog horror. I watch analog horror channels on YouTube. I love found footage horror. So the style of this movie was right up my alley. The guy who plays the host is awesome. I can't remember the actor's name, but he's like the crazy dude that helps out the Joker in The Dark Knight. He killed it in that role. It was awesome. But yeah, that movie's really cool if you like analog found footage or if you just like highly stylized movies. I think you would like Late Night with the Devil. Along the same lines, I watched Hell House LLC, which is a found footage horror series. I believe there's 4 movies in the series right now. I've only seen the first one, and it was my first time watching it. And it's about a haunted house where a bunch of people die the first night that it's open, and it's like this huge mystery. So this documentary crew hunts down one of the surviving people that worked at the haunted house and watches all this footage. And then the documentary team goes to the house itself and you get to see their found footage. So it's like multiple layers of found footage in a documentary style format. And I thought it was cool. The twist at the end was cool. It was kind of like your run-of-the-mill found footage movie where not a lot happens until the very end. But I don't think there's anything wrong with that. That's kind of par for the course of the genre, even going back to Blair Witch Project. But overall, I thought it was cool. I'm definitely going to watch the other 3 movies. So what ended up happening, part of the reason why I watched so many horror movies this week was there's this new movie that just came out called In a Violent Nature. And it's a kind of Friday the 13th style slasher movie, but it's from the point of view of the killer the whole time. So it kind of reverses the perspective of a typical slasher horror movie, which I thought was a really cool concept. So I was under the impression that it was going to come out on Shudder on the release date. So I signed up for a month of Shudder just to find out that it got theatrical release, which honestly is awesome. Like seeing Shudder movies, 'cause I believe it's a Shudder original movie. Seeing Shudder original movies get theatrical releases is really cool. That said, I couldn't stream it, so I'll have to get another month of Shudder when it does finally come out to streaming. All right, so I watched 2 more movies. The first one I watched was Hereditary, which is, the classic. It's not even that old and everyone calls it a classic, but the classic Ari Aster movie. Ari Aster is the same guy that made Beau is Afraid, which I haven't seen, and Midsummer, which is one of my favorites as well. He's just been knocking it out of the park in modern horror. So if you're in the horror movies, there's a very high chance you've seen Hereditary already. But if you haven't seen it, it's so hard to explain. But at least it's hard to explain without spoiling anything. So the grandma of this family dies, and then all this weird stuff starts happening to her family. And the movie is just very like raw emotionally. It examines grief. I think the main theme of the movie is like, can you change your fate? Or like, who's the puppet master in your life when we feel like we have free will over everything, when sometimes we actually don't. But it also focuses a lot on grief and how people deal with death in different ways. And yeah, it's a pretty gnarly movie. It's so good. It was my second time watching it. And just like with Ari Aster movies, I picked up so much stuff on the second watch because he makes movies where every detail is very, very intentional. So there's all these crazy layers of foreshadowing. I'm just really happy that HBO Max added the A24 collection. So those are some of my favorites. Now, the last movie I watched is a movie I've been recommended to me a lot, but I have been putting it off for years, and that is The Killing of a Sacred Deer. Now, this movie I wouldn't call like a straight horror movie. It's more of like it's like a thriller, but it's also very like allegorical, fairy tale-esque kind of feeling to it. But it's about a surgeon who becomes friends with this teenage boy, and the teenage boy has ulterior motives for being friends with him based on something the surgeon had done in his past. And it just revolves around having to make all of these decisions based on how the plot plays out. And that's probably the most I could say without spoiling it. But the crazy part of the movie is the style, which I've never seen other films from this director, but it's the same guy that made like The Lobster, where I guess a lot of his movies have this kind of modern fairy tale kind of feel to it. But the craziest part about the movie is that people show very little emotion during the whole movie, to the point where it's uncomfortable, because all of this insane stuff is happening, and then all the characters who are being affected by this crazy stuff are just having like mundane conversations with each other. So you're kind of sitting there uncomfortable because the emotions of all the characters aren't really matching the plot. And it's very intentional. It's not like the actors are phoning it in and it's just bad, bad dialogue. It's like very intentional style where everything is very like flat. Every character talks in this very flat, blunt manner. And it's a really crazy way to build tension in the movie. And I liked it a lot for that very reason, is that it has a normal thriller plot, but instead of building tension through like heated conversations or, walking through creepy areas with jump scares and stuff like that, it just really makes you feel uncomfortable as a person. And I like that. But yeah, that's about it for me this week. We're trying to get into some natural farming strategies. My tent's going crazy. We're going to harvest soon, and I'm binging horror movies. All right, until next week, y'all. Peace.